I sat at my corner desk, the morning sunlight spilling across the glossy surface, brushing my arms with warmth through the soft silk of my blouse. The city below hummed with its usual chaos, but up here, in my apartment overlooking downtown Chicago, it felt like my own small universe, controlled, precise, orderly. And yet, the ping of my phone shattered that illusion. Eviction notice? The subject line made my stomach twist. It was from Ryan, my younger brother. I hadn't spoken to him in months. Not really. Not since that night when I offered to cover his rent for 6 months. He had laughed. That mocking, careless laugh that still echoes in my mind. I could still see his apartment, cluttered, dimly lit, and him shrugging as if the whole world owed him. I ran my fingers over the phone, feeling the slight vibration through the glass. Part of me wanted to throw it, to shut out the reminder of a past I had tried to forget. But another part, resilient, careful, sharp, knew I couldn't ignore it. I glanced at the framed note on my desk, my grandmother's handwriting curling in blue ink. Help when you can, but never let anyone dim your light. I had carried that lesson quietly all these years, building my life, stacking victories in silence, away from judgment and ridicule. Now, it seemed the past was insisting on knocking. I remember the night like it was yesterday, even though it had been years. The apartment was small, barely enough space for the two of us, and Ryan had that restless energy that always made me anxious. Bills were stacked like tiny towers on the kitchen counter, each one a silent accusation of irresponsibility. I had worked 3 jobs that summer, every shift bleeding into the next, and somehow I had scraped together enough to cover his rent for 6 months. Here, I said, sliding the envelope across the table. My hand trembled slightly, though I tried to mask it. This will get you through. You don't have to worry. Ryan's eyes widened, not with gratitude, but with that familiar smirk. You're joking, he said, laughing, shaking his head. You think I need your money? It wasn't just the words. It was the dismissal, the way he laughed at my gesture. A lump rose in my throat, my hands tightening around the envelope until the paper creased beneath my fingers. I had never felt so small, so dismissed by someone I loved. Ryan, I'm serious, I whispered, trying to steady my voice. I want to help. But he didn't hear me. He never did. That night, I realized there was a line between love and enabling, and he had crossed it, laughing as if my generosity was a joke. I left the apartment that night carrying more than the weight of unpaid bills. I carried the sting of rejection. Outside, the air was crisp, sharp against my cheeks, and I clutched a small locket my grandmother had given me years ago, her words echoing in my mind. Some people aren't ready for the help you give. That doesn't mean you're wrong for offering it. I walked away from that apartment determined to build something of my own, something he couldn't mock or undermine. I didn't yet know what it would be, but I knew one thing. I would never let my kindness be mistaken for weakness again. The envelope remained on his counter, untouched. And in that moment, I understood that independence wasn't just about money. It was about respect, boundaries, and finally, believing in myself, even when the people closest to me didn't. I didn't look back. That night, with the cold wind biting at my cheeks, I promised myself I would carve out a life that was mine alone, one built on effort, not entitlement. The first months were brutal. I juggled 2 part-time jobs and freelance writing gigs, moving between cramped apartments and coffee shops that smelled of roasted beans and stale pastries. Every evening, I pored over spreadsheets, learning to track expenses, budgeting with a meticulousness that bordered on obsession. Then, by sheer luck, or maybe stubbornness, I met Claire Donovan, a seasoned editor with a reputation for spotting raw talent. She noticed my essays and short stories, the ones I had quietly posted online under a pseudonym, and offered me a mentorship that changed everything. Claire didn't just teach me about writing. She taught me about strategy, networking, self-worth. She believed in me when my reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror told me otherwise. There were nights I cried into my laptop, the cursor blinking back at me, impatient and judgmental. Self-doubt gnawed at my edges. Could I really turn this tiny spark into a life I could be proud of? Every rejection felt like a personal failure, but I held on to Claire's words. Hannah, slow progress is still progress. Let them doubt you. You know your worth. Little victories began to appear, almost imperceptibly at first. The first client willing to pay full price for an article. The first check that covered more than just bills. The first time I signed a contract in my own name, not hiding behind anyone, not borrowing anyone else's credibility. Each win stacked quietly, invisible to the outside world, but monumental to me. I started investing cautiously, learning to navigate finances and opportunities that once seemed like distant dreams. I moved into a modest apartment downtown, chic enough to feel like home, but still humble enough that no one would suspect I was quietly building an empire. On social media, I shared filtered glimpses of my life. A coffee cup on a sunlit balcony, a desk with scattered notes. Nothing revealing. Nothing that would clue in the people who thought I was still struggling. All the while, Ryan's laughter from years ago haunted me, a constant reminder of why I had chosen discretion over flaunting my success. I didn't need anyone's validation, not even his. Every email sent, every contract signed, every dollar saved was a silent victory against the disbelief, the mockery, the subtle dismissals I had endured. And in that quiet, painstakingly constructed life, I found my rhythm. I found my power. I found Hannah Blake, not the girl handing over rent money to a scoffing brother, but the woman who could thrive on her own terms, unstoppable and unafraid. The knock came just after lunch. My heart didn't race. No, I had learned how to stay steady, but there was a flicker of anticipation I couldn't entirely suppress. I opened the door to find Ryan standing there, hands shoved deep into his hoodie pockets, the same smug expression I remembered from years ago. Behind him, I could see my parents hesitating at the sidewalk, uncertain. "Hey, Hannah," Ryan said, awkward now, the edge of his former arrogance softened by surprise. "Come in," I replied, my voice calm, welcoming. I stepped aside and gestured toward the living room, where the sunlight streamed across walls lined with framed artwork I had collected on my own, each piece carefully chosen. The shelves were neat, the books a mix of classic literature and industry guides, a small sculpture or two that hinted at both taste and accomplishment. My laptop sat open on the glass desk, email notifications blinking quietly, nothing flashy, but the presence of business in action. Ryan's eyes widened almost imperceptibly, tracing the sleek lines of the apartment, lingering on the polished hardwood floors and the subtle scent of sandalwood in the air. I didn't rush him. I let him take it in, let the silence stretch. "Nice place," he said finally, voice hesitant. I smiled softly. "Thank you." Then I gestured to the desk. "Do you want to sit?" They hesitated, but curiosity won. Ryan sank onto the sofa, my parents on the love seat, their expressions a mix of confusion and cautious pride. I poured coffee for everyone, dark roast, no sugar, just the way they all liked it, and placed the cups in front of them. "I suppose you're wondering why I'm smiling," I said finally, leaning against the desk, the sunlight catching the streaks in my hair. "I want you to understand something. That 6 months of rent I gave you? It was real. I offered it because I cared. You didn't." Ryan's jaw tightened and my parents exchanged glances. "But here's the thing," I continued, my tone calm, almost conversational, yet carrying the weight of truth. "I didn't stop there. I took that disappointment, that laughter, and I built something for myself. I'm not just surviving, I'm thriving. I own my own company. I've invested wisely. My net worth, well, let's just say you wouldn't recognize the girl who handed you that envelope." I watched Ryan's face change in real time, from disbelief to shock, and then to something like shame. My parents' eyes filled with emotion, a mixture of awe and regret. "I didn't tell anyone because it wasn't about proving a point," I said, letting my gaze sweep over them. "It was about living my life on my terms and making sure I never needed validation from anyone who couldn't see my worth at the time." Ryan swallowed, his voice caught somewhere between apology and embarrassment. "Hannah, I know," I interrupted gently. You had your laugh. And now, maybe, you can start understanding what that felt like from my side. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the city below. For the first time, they saw the real me. Not the girl who handed over rent, but the woman I had become, strong, capable, unstoppable. I stood in the middle of the living room, hands folded lightly in front of me, letting the quiet sink in. The air felt different now, charged with tension but also possibility. Ryan shifted uncomfortably on the sofa, his earlier smirk completely gone, replaced by something raw, uncertainty, maybe even remorse. "I want to be clear," I said, voice steady, firm, yet not unkind. "I can help, but things can't just go back to how they were. I'm not giving handouts anymore. If you want my support, there are conditions." My parents blinked, a mix of surprise and pride in their eyes. Ryan's face tightened, but he stayed silent. "First," I said, looking directly at him, "you need to take responsibility for your actions. That means not just paying rent on time, but actively managing your finances. No more relying on me or anyone else to bail you out." He swallowed, cheeks flushed, but I could see the spark of understanding forming. "Second," I continued, addressing both him and my parents, "I want honesty. No more excuses, no more pretending everything is fine when it isn't. If you come to me, you come with the truth." I paused, letting my words settle. "Third, you each need to pursue your own growth. Ryan, that means finding work that challenges you, that builds skills, not just income. Mom, Dad, it means embracing change without judgment. The old patterns, mocking, dismissing, turning my generosity into a joke, they stop now." I saw Ryan shift again, nodding slightly, his pride warring with the reality of my authority. My parents exchanged glances, the weight of my words hitting them like a tide. "I'm not cruel," I said softly. "I care about you all. That's why I'm giving this chance, but only if you're willing to meet me halfway. Change requires effort, accountability, and humility. I will help, but on my terms with boundaries intact. I've spent too many years building a life in silence to watch it be devalued again." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Ryan, quietly, almost reluctantly, said, "Okay. I can do that. I want to do better." My mother's lips trembled, but her eyes glistened. "We're ready," she whispered. I allowed myself a small, genuine smile. It wasn't victory in the way I had imagined as a teenager. It was something deeper. Control wasn't just power. It was the power to guide, to shape growth without enabling past mistakes. I poured another round of coffee, and as I handed Ryan his cup, I added gently, "Remember, I'm still your sister. But respect and effort aren't optional anymore." The room was lighter now, not free of tension, but balanced. I could feel it, the shift. For the first time, the dynamics had changed. The laughter that had once wounded me now carried a lesson, a memory that underscored my strength. And this time it was mine to define. Weeks passed, and the change was subtle but undeniable. Ryan began taking his job seriously, setting reminders for rent, and even budgeting for small savings. He still stumbled at times, but he no longer shrugged off responsibility with a laugh. My parents, too, seemed lighter, more willing to listen and adapt rather than impose their old patterns. One evening, I sat on my balcony, the city lights flickering below like stars fallen to earth. I cradled a small locket my grandmother had given me years ago, the one I had held onto that night. Ryan laughed and smiled. The words she had written still resonated deeply. "Help when you can, but never let anyone dim your light." I had learned to live by that principle, to protect my own worth while offering compassion on my terms. Life had taught me that kindness was powerful, but only when paired with boundaries and self-respect. Ryan knocked softly on my door later that evening, a small bouquet in hand. "For you," he said quietly, voice uncertain but sincere. "I know I can't repay you for what you did, but I want to try. I want to do better." I accepted the flowers with a nod, my chest light, not because of the gesture, but because I could see the change within him. Genuine, deliberate, and hard-earned. It wasn't about control anymore. It was about growth for both of us. As I watched him leave, I realized how far I had come. From the girl handing over rent money, ignored and laughed at, to the woman who had quietly built a life of independence, respect, and power. I had learned to balance empathy with strength, compassion with discernment. And in that quiet triumph, I understood the truth. Success wasn't just about wealth or status or being right. It was about integrity, self-respect, and the courage to remain true to oneself. I closed the balcony door, feeling the warmth of the apartment wrap around me. I looked around at my life, my work, my home, my hard-won stability, and whispered softly to myself, almost like a voiceover in the story of my own life. I stood firm, and I rose. And no one, not even the ones I loved most, will ever make me doubt my worth again. The city hummed below, indifferent, yet somehow in tune with the rhythm I had finally found, a life built on resilience, growth, and grace.